Hi, this is Frank with a Frank Opinion. Today's video I'm going to digress from what I've been talking about over the last couple of months in terms of Medicare for All single payer and focus on something that I've been wanting to share for years, and that is a plan to measurably reduce or eliminate racism in our country, our original sin, if you will. I think it permeates our entire lens with which we look at public policy and allocations of governmental resources. And unless we confront it head on, I don't think we can make much headway, nor can we return America to a previous time of greatness. Certainly we're not there now. A couple of years ago, it dawned on me that almost everything I read almost on a daily basis had something to do with race, and particularly racism and its effects on African Americans. And I started to write a list of all the articles by day. This is almost every day. From the New York Times, from Time Magazine, from The Nation Magazine, from online sources, etc. And literally daily, I was looking at articles that talked about, quote, "Federal report finds bias against black youths in Missouri County Court. The cold cases of the Jim Crow era. Higher expulsion rates for blacks are found. Rise in suicide by black children surprise researchers. The disproportionate risk of driving while black." We all know that one. 1.5 million black men missing from daily life. Why? Because they're incarcerated. I've also started reading Michelle Alexander's, and I've only gotten through maybe a fifth of it. It's a fantastic book. I can tell you right now, I don't have to finish it before saying that. The title of Michelle Alexander's book is The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And it's a fast read as well as being excellent. And a couple of years ago, because I became so obsessed with the fact that I was looking at almost daily articles related to racism and discrimination in our country, I decided to put some thoughts together with what might become a plan to eliminate racism or to measurably reduce it. And I decided to write a letter to Congressman John Lewis. And I want to share that letter with you. And it goes like this. Dear Congressman Lewis, I am writing to you because, in my opinion, you are the one person in our country with a historic understanding, personal experience, and national identification with the civil rights movement that can most effectively call for a national goal of eliminating racism. The scourge of racism has had and continues to have devastating effects on African Americans and other non-white populations, but also threatens what humanity remains within our culture. It has been my experience while serving in government and indeed living life in general that nothing is accomplished without setting a goal. Demonstrations, marches, acts of civil disobedience, and periodic national conversations after Ferguson's or Baltimore's or Watts provide only a temporary catharsis. And then the scourge of racism is allowed to continue devastating individuals, families, communities, and our national soul. I offer the following elements that a long-range plan to dramatically reduce racism in our country and its effects might contain. It is neither complete nor perfect. First, eradicating racism must be a national goal enunciated unequivocally by our president, whether it be our current president or a future one. He or she cannot soft-pedal the pervasiveness of racism in our society. When I wrote this letter, as a digression, a couple of months after I did so, France, the government of France, actually declared as a national goal the elimination of racism and prejudice in France. If they can do it, we can do it. Secondly, the plan would need religious leaders of all faiths, representing all denominations and all of our nation's regions, west, north, south, east, to denounce racism as antithetical to their respective religious creeds and to vow to provide their personal leadership to this national goal, even at the risk of losing a number of their parishioners. Effectively reducing racism will simply not be possible without this element. Third, there would need to be a major public relations campaign aimed at educating Americans about the existence of this national goal and motivating their acceptance and personal support for it. The campaign would need to have resources surpassing those of previous campaigns, such as the anti-smoking campaign, and sustained at a high level of commitment for the time it takes to achieve major results. Media is everything and everywhere. It has to become the acceptable norm to personally exhibit through word and deed that one is against racism. A couple of things here. I started researching the amount of money that the United States pays for changing hearts and minds in the Middle East and elsewhere. It's billions of dollars for Radio Free Europe and so forth and so on. What about changing the hearts and minds of Americans with regard to their fellow Americans that may not be of their color? It's an amazing amount of money. Secondly, just as an aside, a little story. I'm at a card game, and a new dealer comes in, and he makes an outrageously racist remark. There were no African Americans playing at this particular card table. I called him out, and I said, "Vinny, that's pure racism." The one person that agreed with me was the last person at that card table that you would think would have said anything. Big brawly guy, leather jacket, ponytail, tattoos, a biker. And he said, "Vinny, Frank's right. That was outrageously racist." By the way, the card player's name that agreed with me was Steve, and for the next 3 games we sat next to each other. We bonded that night. We bonded on saying something to an individual that made a racist remark. And by the way, Vinny apologized. Fourth, the horrific history of slavery, institutional racism, and race-based discrimination and their social and economic consequences must be taught clearly and courageously, using every venue possible. Particularly important would be making Americans aware of the divergence between the American creed of liberty and equality and racism. Fifth, programs, both voluntary and others supported by governmental incentives, would be developed that provide opportunities for interracial activity and life. An example might be the development of new communities intentionally promoted as having racial diversity as a goal. A new American pioneer story, perhaps. Even in my own community, I don't feel that it's diverse enough. And there have been developers that have created communities. It was on NPR. I have not been able to find the exact segment, but it's in California, and this particular person close to Hollywood created a community where he promoted it and advertised that it should be diverse. African American, Hispanic, religions of different creeds, etc. Only if we live together and work together can we begin to break this schism that we have amongst us. Sixth, corporate America, including major media, must be challenged and then enlisted to become part of the solution by reviewing their hiring, promotional, pay, location, advertising, and other policies, and taking primary responsibility for removing those that are discriminatory. Seventh, institutions at all levels, but especially at the local community level, would be encouraged to be an integral and essential part of accomplishment. This is a national goal, call it a movement, if you like, by developing programs that bring racial groups together to work side by side as equals on community-wide projects. There's a famous couple in Brooklyn, here in New York, Zach and Marie Sansone, and I got involved with them for a brief time years ago. And they had set up an organization to bring races together, a white, essentially white Brooklyn-based community and an adjoining, primarily black community. And they named the organization CURE. And they had all kinds of meetings. Politicians knew them very well. Very famous family. It's not the first, it's not the last. We need more of that. Government agencies would vigorously enforce civil rights regulations and prosecute civil rights violations, but just as importantly, be a resource and a source of information for notable efforts and achievements in reducing the effects of racism, as well as for the promulgation. Let's get the good news out there as well. Let's have examples of people, of communities, of programs that are effective in reducing racism. Ninth, variables to measure the effectiveness over time of achieving this critical national goal can be easily developed if the will is there to do so. There's another one that I'm going to talk about in the next video, which I'm going to mention now and lead into. Obviously, our grotesque income and wealth inequality that has and will continue to create the conditions that allow racist tendencies to flourish and be rationalized must be addressed powerfully and soon. The fundamental point of my letter here, and I won't read the end of this, all to tell you that I did not get a response or acknowledgement from Congressman Lewis. I then proceeded to write individually to every member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Did not get an acknowledgement of receipt of the letter or a response or a phone call or a tweet or an email. I also sent the letter to Reverend William Barber, and also to Professor Louis Gates, and at that point I kind of gave up in terms of getting any acknowledgement. And I did say that this was neither complete nor perfect. The only two things that I think are absolutely essential are religious leaders saying that racism is antithetical to their faith, loudly and with a lot of courage, and the fact that it's got to be made a national goal. In the next video that I'm going to do, too, this is the first on this subject, I'm going to talk about how this impacts resources, allocation of resources, how it permeates public policy, whether it be repeal and replace Obamacare, what have you. I have some knowledge. I feel like the Farmers Insurance commercial, I know a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two, but I'm going to share that with you in my next video. Thank you so much.